We're moving in a new direction, moving forward, and moving beyond smoking. We are Altria, and our companies are leading the way in moving adult smokers away from cigarettes by taking action to transition millions toward potentially less harmful choices as we move from being known as a tobacco company to being recognized as a tobacco harm reduction company. Altria is moving beyond smoking. Find out how at altria.com.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo Odor Jr. I'm here with my friend Ben. And hey man, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name's Benjamin Watkins, and I'm originally from South Carolina, but I live in Norfolk, Virginia now. And my undergraduate is in mechanical engineering, and I currently work as a nuclear engineer for the United States Navy. And I'm also a philosopher, believe it or not. So a weird combination of engineer, philosopher. I'm something of a unique hybrid.
Yeah.
And I'm the host of Real Atheology, a philosophy of religion podcast. And
nice.
So what we do on my podcast is we explore questions in the philosophy of religion from a non-theistic point of view.
Okay.
So we want to see what we can salvage from our religious concepts to see what the shape of religion can look like in the future going forward if we've rejected something like perfect being theism, which is the traditional God concept that we would find in the Western world.
Okay. Well, I would love to talk to you about the philosophy of religion, maybe at the last part of this interview, but man, I want to get down to business and ask you what you believe, because that's what this podcast is about. It's about asking you about your worldview. And can I ask you my first question?
Absolutely.
Okay. So why I assume because you're an atheist how would you define being an atheist? Is it a lack of belief or a positive argument that God positively doesn't exist?
So I'm really glad that you asked this question. So this is something of a mantle I've taken up, and it's certainly made me a number of enemies in the atheist community, because I push back rather strongly on the lack of belief definition of atheism, in the sense that I don't have any problem with people using it that way or identifying themselves that way. But as long as they also recognize that we already have a word for this lack of belief concept,
It's
and
agnosticism. It's agnosticism.
So we could say it's agnosticism. I personally, as an atheist, I understand the concept of atheism as the proposition that God does not exist. Let me start back up where we were with the definition of atheism. So I understand the definition of atheism as the proposition that God does not exist. And whereas I understand theism as the proposition that God does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understand agnosticism as the view that withholds judgment, that does not judge either of these two mutually exclusive and exhaustive possibilities. It just withholds judgment. And then a non-theist view, agnostics are non-theists.
Mm-hmm.
Atheists are also non-theists. They lack a belief, but other things are also non-theists. Children could be non-theists. Persons that just don't have the concept of God, perhaps an animist, like an isolated Amazonian tribesman who's never even considered the question of God's existence.
But
These would be
basically,
non-theists.
you are an atheist, right? Someone who positively believes that there is no classical theory of God.
Correct.
Okay.
So that would be the proposition that I would endorse, in the sense that I believe that proposition is closer to the truth.
Okay.
So one of the two propositions is true. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. And so I think that the proposition God does not exist is closer to the truth. That we would be more right in our assent to that proposition than we would be to the other.
Okay. Cool. So can I ask you, if you're living in a God exclusive world, there is no objective divine purpose, there is no objective morality. Okay, so can you I can give you like 10 minutes to talk about how you live your life, like what is the meaning of your life, how you view morality, and it's basically how you, as a normal human being, like in your normal thought process and philosophizing, concluding from your your assent to the proposition that there is no God, what are the implications of this be on your daily actions, daily life?
So I would say that the belief of atheism itself, it being a negative belief, doesn't have a whole lot of implications for my daily life. Now, something like a positive philosophy like naturalism or humanism, that's going to give me a more positive form of life that I could, articulate. I would push back on the implication that there is no objective morality on the atheist view. So I'm what's called a moral realist in my philosophy. So I believe that our moral claims do state genuine claims that can be true or false, and that some of them are true, and that some of these moral claims don't depend on any facts about subjects. So that would be a meta-ethical question, the status of ethics or morality. But I don't see my atheism as having too many implications in the ethical domain, except for there's just certain moral facts that don't play a part in my philosophy. For example, there is no divine being to tell us to worship on one day rather than another. So it just doesn't feature within my moral framework to have to consider what day I should worship or shouldn't worship. So it has negative implications like that. My form of life is much more humanistic. So rather than trying to cast it in atheistic terms, in these negative, the things that don't feature in my philosophy, humanism is a positive philosophy. And so it does affirm claims about what sorts of forms of life are better than others or are worth pursuing for their own sake. So I believe that human interaction is important. And that it is intrinsically valuable and that the well-being of humans matters. So that's a claim that I think is true, regardless of if atheism or theism is true. But because I'm an atheist, these claims just don't make any appeal to God. So they're still there within the ethical framework that God just doesn't feature as a part of it.
Okay, but briefly, can you define ethics? Because there is no morality, okay? There is not that, but I would say that you have some sort of moral framework, and how would you ground that? What is the ontology, and how would you know whether or not something is epistemologically, if you're in the right or in the wrong in that framework?
So I would push back on the idea that there just is no ethics or that there just is no morality. So I think that the central question of ethics or morality, if we're using these terms interchangeably here, is what should I do?
Yeah.
And so that's the central question. So everything comes down to, and so this could be a very general question, or we can apply this question to particular instances. And so what we're trying to do, and so ethics is just the science of making decisions of what we should do. And so there's other questions you asked about, well, what is the ontology of this? And what is the epistemology of this? And so these two questions are very philosophically oriented. They might be used in jargon that might seem intimidating to other people.
Yeah.
But I would say don't let that bother you, because we can get past that. This is a hurdle that is surmountable. So the idea of ontology is the notion of being. So the idea of existence. What sort of things exist in the world? Well, we're all very familiar with the causal domain, the world of cause and effect. We, bump and collide into objects. We see things causally happen all the time. And so we see causation as adding things that are ontologically weighty. There's things in the world that we have to give positive existence to. Things, like atoms and bosons and the stuff of physics, the laws of nature. These are things that have these ontologically weighty implications. Whereas we can think about other things that exist, such as numbers or possible worlds or logical truths or properties. So something might have the property of being a valid argument. So these aren't things that bump around in the causal world. These aren't, the number 7 has the property of being prime, but I can't go weigh this property of primeness, nor can I go find this number 7. And the fossil record has this property of counting in favor of biological evolution, but I don't have to go dig around in the fossil record to find this property of being evidence for some theory. These things exist in a way that doesn't add ontologically weighty things to the world. We don't have to add things like the property of being a prime number into our ontology in order to account for the truth of something like the property. So I think moral claims or moral truths are much more like these latter kinds of existent things. So when we're talking about, what is the ontology of morality? I think the ontology is much more like mathematics and logic or modality, the idea of possibility and necessity. I think it's much more like these sort of existing things than it is like in the causal world that we would study through the methods of science.
Okay, but to understand what you're saying, are you referring to like a world of forms, or when you say that
Yes.
7 okay, that's
So
interesting.
so we can say that this sounds Platonic,
Yeah,
But
it
now,
does.
Platonism is going to want to add ontologically weighty things that don't exist in space and time.
Okay.
So I take an alternative view from the Platonic view. It's often called quietism, which says that no, we don't have to imagine these different worlds, non-spatial, non-temporal worlds where forms just have this ontologically weighty existence.
So
We just don't
quietism.
have to make it.
I'm searching quietism right now. There's only Christian definition, which is I don't think that's
So
what you're using.
quietism is going to be found in the philosophy of someone like John McDowell or Derek Parfit.
How do you define that?
So quietism is a view that we don't have to make any ontologically weighty claims. So the ontologically the driving
sounds like a
force
cop-out.
behind.
No offense.
Well, so there's it's fair. So the driving force behind these ontologically weighty objects comes from your next question, which is epistemology. The how do we know? And so one of the widely accepted theories of knowledge in epistemology is this correspondence theory of truth. That things are true by how they correspond to things in the world. So, the statement that the cat is on the mat is true if there is a cat on the mat. That and that's what this proposition is about.
But before you continue with the epistemology, okay, can I ask you though, I think there's another option to quietism. I think it's just saying that there is nothing, that there is no ontology to morality because there is no in the way we are trying to prove it, it doesn't exist in space and time. And so if you can't prove it, scientifically, as you would, as you would say that you can't prove God scientifically, why can't Christians use quietism too, like you use for morality? Before we move to the epistemology part.
So I think this is a very good point. And I think me tackling the epistemology point might help us transition into that point a little bit better. Because so in the epistemology part, the correspondence theory of truth says that things are, claims are true by how they correspond to things. So if we're talking about this correspondence, we're already presupposing this ontologically weighty something to correspond to. So that's why we get these ideas of the number 6 existing in this platonic realm for our claims to correspond to.
Okay, can I ask you something about the correspondence theory? Can you define it again for the guest? Because I think that when you say correspondence, you're more of saying there is a certain correlation that you're making with a concept and reality itself. That correspondence is different from that, I think, right?
Yes. So the idea of a correspondence theory of truth is, so we'll use the claim I used earlier, the cat is on the mat. So we would ask the question, so if this claim is true, what makes it true? What is truth?
Yeah, what is truth?
How do we get at truth? And so the correspondence theory of truth is one theory of how we can account for the truth of such a claim. And so there's 3 broadly competing views on the scene. One is the correspondence theory. The second is the coherence theory of truth, which says that if something is true, if it is coherent with all of our surrounding knowledge such that we have a coherent whole.
Well, I find those 2 problematic though, but please continue. I would
and the third one is called pragmatism, which is the idea that something is true based on how successful it is or how useful it is. Yes. Now, the correspondence theory of truth is widely seen as the leading theory of truth. It's the one that people find intuitively the most plausible, and I think it drives a lot of these ontologically weighty intuitions. Even about the nature of God. If we're going to say that God exists, there must be this ontologically weighty thing in the world. Now, I don't take that route.
Okay.
I don't believe that these three views are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
I believe that they're all climbing the same mountain from the different side.
True.
So with mathematics, we don't have to commit ourselves to a correspondence theory of truth. Mathematics is much more like a coherence theory of truth.
Okay.
Our mathematical models.
I want to say something about mathematics though before you go on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Please, go ahead.
I think there are two theories on mathematics right now. One is like William Lane Craig's theory, which is that mathematics is descriptive of it's prescriptive, which means that it's already there in reality, and we're just observing mathematics. And the other one is what nihilists would view it as, that it's simply descriptive. We're just making stuff up, a certain subjective measurement, and using this subjective measurement, we can describe the reality. So, which one would you choose, or are you using?
So I would resist the choice between them. So I think it's going to be, so it's depending on by the very way the world is.
Okay.
That's going to depend on how we're going to approach
but I think you can
methods of truth.
I think you can escape it though, because you said earlier that number 7, these concepts like morality are in a certain way in similar to the world of forms, but not specifically to that. And so in a way, it's already embedded in reality, these ideas, these concepts. So I would say you're proposing the prescriptive mathematics.
Probably. So I am not too familiar with the distinction between prescriptive and descriptive mathematics.
Okay.
Now I am familiar with William Lane Craig's divine aseity arguments for nominalist views. The idea that there couldn't be this Platonic realm of forms because that would compromise God's sovereignty over all. And so that some form of nominalism must be true to keep God's sovereignty intact.
Okay.
I am familiar with those arguments. I don't know how much that discussion relates to what you're talking about by prescriptive and descriptive mathematics.
Okay, but please continue with talking about mathematics to prove that, or at least establish why you have your moral framework and about it. Okay.
Mathematics doesn't prove or imply ethics. The point I want to make with mathematics is that what we're trying to do with mathematics, the methodology and the ways that we would test for something to be true in mathematics, is going to be a coherentist methodology. We're going to say, okay, what if we assume that this is the case? What follows from that, and how many tensions, i.e. contradictions, does that cause to arise? And that's how we decide between, whereas if we're talking about something scientific or in the natural sciences like physics, then we're doing more correspondence work. We're trying to go out and understand how our theories or claims correspond to a third-person world that's objective. And whereas the very methodology of science, the philosophy of science or the natural sciences, is going to have a pragmatic theory of truth to it. Our different scientific methods, we're going to demarcate them and delineate between them based on how useful they are and how successful they are. certain experiments are going to be better at getting us to truth than others. So I think that these three ideas of coherence, correspondence, and pragmatism are climbing the same mountain from different sides, and they should all arrive at the same peak, and that peak being a metaphor for truth. And that this truth will encompass mathematics, logic, ethics, the causal domain, and the natural sciences, sociology, physics, psychology, biology, chemistry. And so that we end up with this rational whole. So my philosophy is very largely inspired by the divine.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a Nietzschean in this sense, but I think that his concern is valid here, because he's asking us, if we're going to do away with this God concept, what fills that void? There's a conceptual void in our world spirit that must be accounted for. This is one of the large reasons why I think it's a fool's errand or naive to think that religion is just going to die out.
Yeah.
Religion's not going to die out. It's going to evolve. It's going to evolve into something much different than it is now. Religion is part of humanity. Any anthropologist will tell you, if you study the history of human evolution, we have evolved.
We're innately predisposed to.
Yes, to have this idea. So it's not so much a predisposition to have a certain belief of a certain concept. It's this pointing or this desire towards meaning and reverence and awe and the collective. This is, again, my Hegelian coming out in me. It's our self-consciousnesses becoming more and more aware of what we are in our place in the universe, and the awe and the angst that comes with doing that. Because the idea that we're alone in the universe is terrifying.
It is.
The idea that we're not alone in the universe is terrifying. It doesn't matter what the more that our collective self-consciousnesses become aware of how the world is in and for itself, it's going to evolve those religious concepts.
Okay.
And so what I want to do with my project in Real Atheology is, what are those religious concepts going to look like?
Yeah.
And so I can't just stop the conversation at, I'm an atheist and I reject the perfect being theistic conceptions of the traditional Western theisms, and that the conversation stops there. I can't do that, because there might be something more that now granted, our philosophical questions might not have answers. It might be the case that there is nothing divine, and that the concept of the divine is just a human construct. But that's the nature of any inquiry. We're not guaranteed. Anytime we set out on an inquiry, a new inquiry, a genuinely new inquiry for the first time.
But what you're saying is that philosophy is helping us on trying to understand who God is, what the divine is, and there might not actually be a divine, or we are redefining the divine to something we can apply in our daily lives, like in how you apply it.
So now, I'm so glad you just said that. Now we've come full circle into the idea of quietism.
Quietism is...
So this is how quietism could come in and help our religious cause. Look, we have these stories, we have these traditions, and they have important truths. They tell us something meaningful about the world.
But don't you find something problematic with quietism, right? Because if that's your basis, of your knowledge on these concepts that you can't even prove in space and time, right? You're just trying to, correlate them with correspondence, coherence, and pragmatist theories, but you might actually be wrong. You could be, because you're just correlating. But the thing is that you're someone who's acting in your daily life, in your actions, in your behaviors, and you have to ground them on something real. But I guess, being humans, we don't know what real is yet. But I
think we do. So that's the whole point of my view, is that, so I'm a realist about reason. So I think the thing that, so like when I say like there are reasons in the world, I think those are real. I think there are real reasons, and that those reasons.
What do you mean by real
us.
reasons?
So real reasons are considerations that really count in favor of us responding to them in some way. So if pain really is bad, we all have a reason. We all have a reason to want to avoid.
But why do you think we have real reason? What? How do you know you have real reason? What is real reason? What is the ontology of real reason?
So, because I think if we don't have real reason, then I think we just end up in an epistemically unacceptable position. Because at that point, you could just say, well, contradictions could count in favor of believing in certain ways. Or that contradictions weren't.
What do you mean?
So if I say that two beliefs are contradictory,
okay,
I'm saying that they.
So you have to follow the laws of logic, right? To be a rational person. So we have to be rational people. That's what you're saying.
The laws of logic just describe.
Yeah.
That two things. But I'm saying the nature of a contradiction. Let me use a different example then that might help. It's just the nature of an argument. So some argument might have the property of being valid, and it might also have the property of having true premises. Now, if it's valid, if an argument is valid, and it has true premises, I've only described what that argument is like. I would then make the additional claim of reason that we should, ought, or must accept the conclusion of that argument.
But why?
Because
why?
It has true premises.
Who says there are true premises, though? There is just valid.
That's the nature of the thought experiment. That's the nature of the thought experiment.
But it's just an experiment. But why? What really? Why?
That's the nature, but because that's a reason. Because if what makes it a reason? We're asking, right? Like, so you're saying that there is this true premise. You claim that it is true, but how do you know? But you're only referring to reason to know that it's a true premise. So let's imagine that I put a piece of paper in front of you.
Okay.
And on that piece of paper, I write, all men are mortal.
Okay.
Socrates is a man.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's imagine that those first two premises
are true.
Okay?
Yeah.
We'll accept them as true, and that the argument is valid. But now, those two premises do not entail that you should, ought, or must accept the conclusion of the argument.
There isn't. Yeah, that argument, you're right. There is no ought. There is no should there.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So we have to appeal to a substantive, normative claim.
You're appealing to something that might not exist.
A reason. No, so yes. There is a reason, but then if we say that they don't exist,
but there might not be a reason.
So then the counterfactual is there might not be a reason. I'm saying that's impossible.
Why you're saying it's impossible?
That idea is impossible.
Why?
Because then we could just believe anything.
So what?
So what?
Yeah, right. So what? If
it's false, so what?
Yeah.
If we shouldn't believe that, so when you say, so what, I don't have to give an answer. I don't have to give an argument. We can believe anything.
Yeah.
And I don't have to justify.
Yeah. That's the thing.
So that can't be the case. So there must be real reasons.
But why?
That's the reductio ad
Well, you know,
absurdum.
I'm not being annoying here, but I'm just this is really important stuff to ask, right?
So my argument is a reductio ad absurdum. So you just agreed that if we said there aren't real reasons,
when you're saying
situation.
when you're claiming reductio ad absurdum, you're presupposing that there is real reason. But we are already questioning reason itself.
You have to presuppose, yes. So if you give reductio ad absurdum.
So it's a proper basic belief that
it doesn't use.
The
nature of a reductio ad absurdum is that it doesn't make any.
It's using reason. It's presupposing reason.
It only uses claims that
are supposed to be relevant, right?
Yeah. And so that you then take. So if we assume, for the sake of argument, that there are no real reasons, we arrive at an absurd conclusion. So
yeah.
You say, well, why shouldn't we accept an absurd conclusion? That itself is a reductio ad absurdum.
Yeah,
if you were willing to accept contradictions or absurdities in your view,
but the thing is, we're talking about real reason here. And in order to question real reason, you have to have like a properly justified understanding, or at least belief in it. But you're showing nothing except what did you say earlier?
A reductio ad absurdum.
Yeah, and
I'm giving an argument.
It's a circular argument, though.
Fundamental.
It's a circular
argument. It's a fundamental. It's a primitive argument. It's not circular.
But who says it's primitive argument? You're right, because we're questioning reason itself.
Exactly. So the idea is, can we get behind reason? Can we get behind? We can't.
We can't.
And every time we try to get behind it, we're going to fail. It's like you said, every attempt to get behind reason is going to imply the use of reason.
Okay.
So we can't get behind.
Yeah.
So that the idea of taking.
So you're saying that in a way,
independent,
like reality
of reason is impossible.
Yeah, like reality is like expecting us to be reasonable people. Because we just can't. That's what you're saying?
No. So on the Hegelian view, the rational is the real, and the real is the rational. So we have our rational capacities because we are part of the world. We are products of the world. So a rational world is not going to give rise to something irrational that just doesn't fit, that is just absurd. That doesn't make any sense. How could the world give rise to a contradiction or an absurdity?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you that there is rationality, and it truly exists in reality. I definitely agree with you on that.
And we can't get behind it.
Yeah. But I believe it for different reasons, but okay.
So that's fair. So that's the nature of philosophical disagreement.
Yeah, but I guess. But I want to clarify though, right? Like, we're not proving anything here. We're just saying that we can't escape this rat hole. We have to assume there is reason in order for us to engage in reason, right? So that's what
I think we can escape it. I think we can escape the rat hole. I think that there is a solution. I think that reductio ad absurdum does get us.
But reductio ad absurdum again is referring to reason itself, right? So it's still a circular argument. There is no escape.
Well, so there's two different views that we could have here about the nature of knowledge. We could be internalists about knowledge, or we could be externalists.
What?
So internalists believe that all of the sufficient conditions for knowledge are available to our internal mental states, so that we can directly know the truth. And then there's externalists.
Is it when you say internally know the truth? Like, is it in our brains that there is already? There are already consciousness there.
Will probably make more sense if I contrast it with the externalist view that you're more familiar with, which is something like properly basic beliefs. So an externalist view is going to say that as long as our cognitive faculties are functioning properly, then we can come to reliably have knowledge. That's what are the conditions for having knowledge. Whereas the internalist denies this and says, no, there are principles that we can appeal to in our own internal mental states that justify our knowledge. So one of these principles is called the principle of phenomenal conservatism.
Yeah.
And so this idea is that if things seem to be the case, then we have at least some justification for believing that that's how they really are.
Yeah.
So if something seems like a real reason,
but you know what's interesting though. Yeah, but what's interesting is what's interesting is you're using reason when you're using these approaches, whether internal or externalist, right? So it's still a circular argument.
Well,
would you agree?
So the externalist says there is no circularity because there's external factors that make it the case that justify our knowledge. They avoid the circularity.
So the external factors, what are these external factors?
Would be your cognitive faculties functioning properly.
Okay.
That would be the external factor. So Plantinga puts forward a
Plantinga is a theist, though.
That's an exactly. And this is an externalist understanding of knowledge.
So you think that Plantinga has a good point on this, on his proposal for reason?
So I think the idea of properly basic beliefs is a good method for understanding world.
Are you going to use it?
So like the idea of a properly basic belief is one that we don't have to infer from other beliefs.
Yeah,
so
because
the idea that there's an external world.
Yeah.
Or the idea that there are other minds in the world.
Yeah.
And so the externalist is going to avoid the circularity objection by just saying, look, as I'm going to make the assumption that my cognitive faculties are working properly. And if that assumption is true, then I have genuine knowledge. Mm-hmm. The internalist is going to insist, no. I have this principle of phenomenal conservative. If it seems to me that I have knowledge and absent any defeaters, then it is the case that I have knowledge. Now, both of these views, this is a very hotly debated topic. There's each camp has, its own set of defenders, and I've gone back and forth between these two views. I don't know which view is true. There's hybrid views too. There are internalist and externalist combined views that I don't really understand.
Well, yeah, okay.
But,
yeah. Well, I just want to say that
certainly interesting.
Yeah, I don't want to go on a
tangent.
Neither
of us are putting forward circular.
Yeah.
Well, so neither of us are putting forward circular arguments. I would want to resist that. Oh well, it's just circular. It's not circular on either view if you can clearly articulate.
If you use properly basic beliefs, right?
Or an internalist views that appeals to something like a principle of phenomenal conservatism.
Okay. Can I ask you? Can I ask you?
Self-justifying.
So what I would love to talk about this stuff, but I guess that we could go on a tangent on this. But the thing about you mentioned,
it's so easy to do.
Yeah. I love philosophy by the way, and I love listening to you, my friend. When you said that you're an atheist, it's not because of this or that, but it's because you analyzed what is divine, right, in philosophy or religion. Can you go on that? It's really interesting. I want to listen to that for the next 30 minutes.
The traditional question is, does God exist? And the question that I want to instead ask is, what is the nature of the divine? If there even is a divine, what is worthy of our worship, our awe, our reverence? So why am I an atheist? Why do I take on that label? Well, the traditional Western concept of God attributes these certain properties to God. And I think that there are three in particular that raise serious issues. The first is an all-powerful God. The second is a benevolent God, a purely, perfectly moral, good being. And the third is the idea of a disembodied mind. So the largest reason why I'm an atheist is the problem of evil, the well-worn problem of evil. It seems that there's a lot of really bad stuff in the world. God is all-powerful. Why is there bad stuff? He knows about it. He could do something about it, yet he chooses not to. And so that this is just a tension with perfect goodness and power. And that this problem also shades into what's called the problem of divine hiddenness. If God is perfectly loving and wants nothing more than to have a relationship with us, then why are there these non-resistant non-believers? Why are there these people who aren't resisting God, just don't believe that God exists? So that's the second reason. The third reason has to do with the idea of a disembodied mind. So I think all minds that are capable of rational abilities have brains. So I don't think that we can have this idea of rational capacities in this mind separate from a brain.
But would you say that that AI, artificial intelligence, at some point could be a disembodied mind?
No. So I guess that's a very good point to make. I should say a physical structure. So AI would use a physical structure.
At least not. It's not a brain, but more of like just something physically based, right? That's
Exactly.
what you're saying. Okay.
So I think that there has to be something. It's got to be material based.
Okay.
So I think in that sense, to go to the philosophy of mind, I think matter is more fundamental than mind. I think that matter gives rise to mind. The fourth reason is religious disagreement. So if there is a perfect being who wants a relationship with all of us, he would want us to have the same common shared experience and knowledge of him. And the fact that there is widespread religious disagreement seems to undermine the idea of the more particular claims. Now, notice that this argument doesn't undermine the widespread belief that there is something of religious significance in the world and that it requires certain forms of life. Doesn't rule that out. And the fifth reason is biological evolution. So I think that if we're talking about the perfect being, God, theism, the Western tradition, I think the idea of special creation is much more antecedently probable. Whereas if there were no such divine being, this idea of biological evolution over millions of years using natural selection, an inevitably cruel process, an inefficient process, just doesn't make any sense. And so that this whole idea of biological evolution is just more likely on something like metaphysical naturalism than it is on theism.
Yeah.
And so what this gets us,
okay, just to summarize, just summarize, the first one is the problem of evil, God being omnipotent, hiddenness, disembodied mind,
minds, and religious disagreement, biological evolution.
Okay.
So those are the five that and so the question also gets posed to me.
And those are good arguments, by the way. Mind? Yeah, those are really, really good ones.
And so, but there's the other side of this. What would change my mind?
Exactly.
So what would change my mind, I think the argument from religious experience is going to be the strongest. I don't think I have had a religious experience of a perfect being theistic sort. I think I have had what could be broadly considered religious experience in a pantheistic sort of way. I witnessed a total solar eclipse. And I would say that's probably the most religious experience that I've ever had in my life. So that's one way. That's
really interesting, by the way. Well, like, so if you're an atheist that is not open to the classical theory concept of God, but is open to pantheism, panentheism, it's really interesting. I've never,
Well, let me blow your mind a little bit more then.
Yeah.
Let me see how much more I can do.
Yeah, please do.
Because there's also arguments on the theistic side. So I am sympathetic to certain types of cosmological arguments that imply that there must be some sort of metaphysical ground for reality. And so, again, I'm a Hegelian. I believe that this metaphysical ground is reason. And so I'm very much attracted to these cosmological arguments that make use of something like a principle of sufficient reason, something that is trying to say, look, that there is this complete whole, and that we cannot understand that complete whole without appealing to something more fundamental. And I think that more fundamental thing is this idea of reason, this idea of a rational whole. The real is the rational is the real. Again, very, very Hegelian in my thinking here.
Yeah.
But so that takes advantage. That's a resource in the philosophy of religion, cosmological arguments, that I can use to try to make this case. I also find teleological arguments in certain forms moving. The idea that we live in a moral arena, the idea that there is a universe that has finely tuned constants to however, pick your favorite fine-tuning fact. The argument often goes, the universe seems fine-tuned for life. The universe seems fine-tuned for moral agents. Agents making morally significant decisions.
You're right.
So the idea that the universe can give rise to these rational beings capable of understanding themselves and interacting in morally significant ways with others, I think points to something divine. Now, I don't think that thing is a perfect being. And I already gave the reasons why I think that. But I haven't given up. I haven't stopped the conversation, because I think there are these arguments on the other side. Religious experience, cosmological arguments.
Yeah, but to be honest, I really think that you are in a way a true philosopher, and that you consider both sides of the argument, both arguments.
Well, thank you. That's probably the highest compliment I could get.
Man, that's really awesome. That. And what I respect though is that you understood the implications of what these theistic arguments are, right? That the universe seems to be fine-tuned for moral agents, So in a way, you understood those implications and form your own worldview on those actions, right? And that I really admire that. That's.
So some of the best advice I can give people, and it might seem trivial, but I really don't think I can overemphasize it enough, is that we all build our own worldviews. And so the best way to do that is to look at the landscape of each individual question that you're looking at, and just start writing down facts.
Exactly.
Start writing down the thing that you go, okay, we know. So you often see atheists squirm with the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah,
I know you've witnessed it, and some will even go as far as to deny certain things that are just uncontroversial in physics. Whereas if they had just taken their time and said, okay, here's the question and here's the facts, then you make your judgment. Once you have all the facts laid out in front of you, then you can start making judgments. Then you can start comparing hypotheses. And I feel like that it's just a very simple act of going, okay, what do I think the facts are here, and how are the best ways to verify? Because the fine tuning in physics is almost universally uncontroversial. Yeah. Almost any physicist will tell you that if you change our local conditions by even the fractionest of a fraction hair, you are going to get completely wild and different science fiction-y sounding scenarios in which life as we know it and understand it
could not
exist. And so now you might be able to, change multiple parameters and get life permitting, like maybe if you change the nuclear force just slightly, some other one just slightly, maybe you'll get a life. I don't know. Those are, that's not one of the facts you would try to write down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
you would write down the facts as you go through and read what people have to say on both sides. And then at the end of it, you're like, you pretty much have an essay that you've written yourself with all the facts, and then your judgments and conclusions at the end of it. You've put it in your own words. You're thinking for yourself. You're considering all of it. Like it sounds trivial. It sounds almost too simple or not even worth mentioning. But it's so important.
Yeah, it is.
And that's not. I'm not even. We're talking about philosophy of religion here. Do this in all aspects of life, politics, making just personal decisions in your life.
Yeah,
I can't tell you how much stress and anxiety you reduce in your life.
It is.
If when you're making decisions, just on a piece of paper, just write down the facts. Write down the things that you know, the things you can control, and the things you can't control, and then you make your judgments.
But I just want to say that when you said that the argument from religious experience is one of the things that stops you from becoming just a normal theist. But I would say that I completely agree with you with all your arguments, and on both sides, that those those arguments are really problematic for theists. The problem of evil, evolution. But what to me though, I personally have these religious experiences, and I would be even say that it is the Holy Spirit working in me. But this is not a religious channel, but I just want to say that that's one of the reasons why I am a Christian. Basically, other than that, I could be a pantheist too. Yeah. But you're right.
But so I think that a really good thing for the listeners too is this is really the project of what we were mentioning earlier with Plantinga and his reformed epistemology and properly basic beliefs. The idea being that personal relationship that you experience is veridical, and that it's veridical in a way that just saying that the external world exists or that there are other minds, and it's veridical in that sort of way. Yeah. Now obviously this view has its own critics, but it's definitely something worth looking into in an area, especially for atheists.
Yeah. One last question. Because I am diving into phenomenology, and that's what I'm going to focus on maybe for my career, if I want to be study philosophy and get a PhD someday, hopefully. What is your knowledge on it? Because that's what I'm working on here. Like, I'm interviewing people based on how they experience the world, the phenomena itself. Because there are weird people here, that people with different experiences, and they believe in ghosts, they believe in this and that, different stuff. But we're all just human beings, and that's what we.
Well, you picked a heck of a question to go out on, and I could not be more happy for this question. By the way, this is. I don't know if you planned it this way or not, but I'm certainly gonna tip my hat to you on this one. So phenomenology is something that I'm currently getting into.
Yeah, man.
To help the listeners a little bit, and if I start to ramble, please let me know, because
I would love to hear you ramble.
I might on this subject. I might start rambling. I'm just gonna give you.
We could go 2 hours if you want to finish.
There you go. Yeah. Oh yeah. As long as you would go. I don't mean to do that.
Okay. Sorry.
So there's 2 big schools in contemporary philosophy. So Immanuel Kant is one of the just figureheads of philosophy.
Yeah.
Writing around the 1780s. If I'm mistaken about that, someone will correct it in the comments. But these 2 movements in philosophy are the split from Kant's philosophy and German idealism in general. And so the first is in the English-speaking world, and it's called the analytic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so analytic philosophy Think mathematics. That's
Yeah.
the easiest way
Yeah,
to
it
explain
is.
it. It's
Yeah.
very, it's symbolic logic, rigorous argument, attention to detail. But the works in analytic philosophy, to use the figurehead example, is something like Bertrand Russell's and Alfred Northern Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, where they try to reduce all of mathematics to logic.
Mhm.
And so basically prove that 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
Which, sounds kind of silly, but that's what the tradition was trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
Whereas there's this other tradition that happened springing out of Europe, in
continental?
the non-English speaking world,
The
the
continent.
continental tradition. And so the continental tradition says, okay, look, all of those theoretical arguments and trying to figure out if 2 + 2 = 4 and ultimately failing at that, most people think that Principia Mathematica does not accomplish what it set out to do. Think drama. Continental philosophers are more like your drama students. So they're going
Yeah.
to read novels and they're going to understand life and experience as the phenomenal world presents it to ourselves. So the idea here in phenomenology is, let's think of the example I read recently was an alarm clock. And that you're just, the alarm clock presents itself to our consciousness, we don't see the whole alarm clock. We have to move around the alarm clock. We have to flip it upside down. We have to turn its knobs and figure out how to work it. The alarm clock presents itself to us in certain ways that we can't, like we were saying with reason earlier, we can't get behind. I can't bite my own teeth. I can't look myself directly in the eye. I can't look at this alarm clock and both the front and the back at the same time. And so these insights in the phenomenology of life are what phenomenologists study. And they try to understand the world and how it evolves and progresses through the evolution of the phenomena that we experience. And so this tradition runs from, after following Kant, Edmund Husserl, and into Martin Heidegger, who unfortunately is a Nazi, but he's probably, next to Ludwig Wittgenstein, probably the most important philosophical figure of the 20th century. And it's because of his contributions to phenomenology. So his major work was called Being and Time. And so he sees, being our first person perspective in existence through time. So understanding the nature of what it is to be a human through time as phenomena, phenomena presented to ourselves.
Yeah.
There's just huge, rich literature that runs out of that. Trying to think of his name, and I can't think of it. It's escaping me at the moment. It'll come to me. Deleuze. Very big phenomenologist. And so my background is primarily within the analytic tradition.
Oh, okay.
And so my Hegelian turn has brought me now to the forefront of continental philosophy and phenomenology. So I've taken one branch from Kant, and now I'm going down the other. And Hegel has been my window, my doorway, however you want to say it, into that. So I've been calling this my Hegelian turn in my thought.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's been an awesome conversation about, I hope you understand me just trying to push back and just ask some really hard questions.
That's philosophy.
Yeah. And I love talking to you, man, but awesome. Well, thank you for your
Views of
time.
Pure philosophy. I loved it. Thank you for having me on. I hope I can come on again, or maybe have you on my show, and we'll talk some philosophy again.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, sure. Well, and so that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
It feels like we've waited 366 times 2 for this year. Plenty of time to rethink your grand entrance. In you enter. They think you're going in for a bear hug, you run for it, secretly slipping a holiday scratcher in both back pockets, boom. That entrance would be money, like top prizes ranging from $500 to $500,000. Play along with holiday scratchers from the Virginia Lottery at a retailer near you. For odds and more information, visit VALottery.com.
It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs, or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.